Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm your host and Fine Woodworking Editor, Tom McKenna. And with me today are regulars, Executive Art Director Mike Pekovich.
Hey, guys.
And Special Projects Editor Matt Kenny.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have a special guest coming in today, well, not coming in, on the phone. Professional woodworker Clark Kellogg will be joining us later in the show. Before we get started, let me take care of some housekeeping. Don't forget to check our website to keep up with our exciting tool giveaway for Fine Woodworking's 40th anniversary. We have 40 great tool prizes, but they change regularly, and you have to enter for each one. The current prize is an Infinity brand 3/4-inch bandsaw blade, and we'll be giving away 2 of them.
It must be really, really long. Infinity. Thank you.
Beyond.
Good night.
All right. To enter, go to finewoodworking.com/40sweeps. That's the number 40. Again, finewoodworking.com/40sweeps. Finally, you can keep up with Fine Woodworking on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can look for Matt, Mike, and me on Instagram as well. So the first thing we wanted to talk about today was our latest issue has finally come back from the printer.
Yeah,
Off the press, yeah.
just yesterday, right?
I think so. Yeah. That's when it landed on my desk.
Yeah, just yesterday.
Of course, I dropped my my copy in a puddle on my way, when I got out of my car when I got home. That was kind of a bummer.
Garrett Hack's on the cover, and you, Mr. McKenna, shot that cover shot.
That was awesome. And it's funny, this, behind the scenes stuff, I think make it boring for some people, but I think it's really funny about the photo that Mike picked, because it really was a setup shot that I was using to try to dial in a cover shot. And it was, one of my outs, and Mike liked it and said, "Oh, that's really cool." And I said, "Boy, I wasn't really set up for that, but it was a really cool article to work on." Garrett's always fun to work with. He's got a good eye. He's a master of design, and it's always an education to kind of pick his brain as he's working and kind of get where he's coming from. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, he also has a big old barn full of lumber.
Yeah.
And he'll let you climb up, and it's all rickety. You got to climb up little ladders and walk across gangplanks to look at certain boards.
Yeah, and you can also walk through the woods. He also has piles of lumber scattered about throughout the woods, which is also funny. You can go pet his big horse, Jazz, his plow horse.
Or one of those
it's a fun trip.
He has 2 cows, right?
For now, I think one is probably almost dead. No, it's a real farm. He has a real farm, and so his cows are for slaughter.
So last time I was up there during the photo shoot, he would want to stop so he could go out and rotate his hay that he was drying out in the field. So I was working around his hay schedule.
Those are always interesting. So, I also worked on another article with Tim Coleman. He makes these things called bench puppies, and they're essentially very clever work holding devices that he slips into the bench stock holes on his workbench and in his tail vise. It's really super simple but super smart.
Yeah, and actually, they call them bench puppies. I think could be a little misleading. I don't know, because they're not like bench puppies I've seen, like the Veritas bench puppies. So they're not like dowels that just stick up out of a hole. They're very clever work holding devices that will hold things that are round, that are square.
Anyway, anything.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool indeed.
So what did you work on, Matt?
Well, I think this issue does have an article I did with Tim Rousseau up in Maine on resawing. And Tim is a fantastic woodworker. He teaches at Center for Furniture Craftsmanship.
Right.
And he lives just outside of Camden, Maine. And I love doing photo shoots and working with Tim. He's very always well prepared, very smart, knowledgeable guy, easy to get along with, funny. And things always go smoothly. And also, as I discovered the last time I was up there, I shot that article back in June of last year. And I knew that the sun stays up and comes up very early in the morning and stays up very late in that part of Maine. So I took my waders and my fishing poles, and I spent quite a few hours fishing just right close to Tim's house is the St. George River. And I had a great time catching a lot of fish.
And your waders.
And my waders on the St. George River.
We need a picture of that. Well, maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know if it says something about me, but I always remember my photo shoot trips by things like that. It's like,
I remember a picture of you holding this little tiny bait fish. Was that what you meant by catching a fish?
Catch of the week.
no, that was the curse of Ben Blackmore, that we caught those tiny little fish the first time he and I ever went fly fishing. No, I was catching like, I think the biggest thing I caught that trip was about a 15-inch long smallmouth bass.
Oh, cool.
And I caught a lot of smallmouth bass in the sort of 10 to 12 inch range as well.
That's a good day.
Yeah, it was great.
Cool.
I had a great time.
Awesome.
I just do want to stress, though, I was fishing before and after work time. I wasn't doing it in the middle of the day.
Sure you weren't. So Mike did a tool review for us here. I think what was it?
Yeah, it was
the
a Lee Nielsen honing guide. In fact,
Yeah.
that was my favorite tool of all time for the week. A few
That
weeks
week.
back. That week.
Oh, that's right. You did mention it on the podcast. Yeah.
Right. So you really don't have to buy the issue because I'll just say it's really good.
Yeah.
So
It's awesome. Read it front to cover.
Yeah.
And there's really something, one of my favorite articles in the magazine. Before we move on, we're doing this looking back segment or department in the issue, and this one is of Sam Maloof, and it's basically his essay on how he builds his chairs, his rockers, and it's really a wonderful piece, and you really get a really nice glimpse into his philosophy. It's really a fun read.
Right.
So let's get on to some questions. This one comes from Nino Olivares, and he writes, I have a 6-year-old 18-inch bandsaw. My thrust bearing is making a lot of noise. It's only 3 years old, and it's my second set. To improve on the noise issue, I was thinking of upgrading to a ceramic guides and thrust blocks. Will that help?
Well, one, yeah, that would help, but we don't think it's necessary.
No.
Because based on the photo that he sent in, and also based on the fact that his bearings seem to be making noise continuously, in particular the thrust bearing, we know are pretty sure that he's just simply setting the thrust bearing too close to the blade.
Yeah, it
right.
shouldn't.
Thrust bearing being the bearing right behind the blade
Correct,
to give it
yeah.
that front to back support.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's almost in continuous contact with it, but that's not where it should be, right?
No, I mean, I've always been taught, and I followed this advice, where you set it up so if anything, the blade just skims that bearing. It may move a little bit depending, how true your blade is, and it really won't come into contact until you start sawing.
Right.
So if
Yeah.
you're setting it up to where that blade is continuously against that thrust bearing, it could be putting a lot of wear and tear on that.
Yeah, that's probably why he had to replace the set already.
Maybe so.
Yeah, so I would think that even his side bearings are probably, if he's having to replace those as well, he's probably got those pressed onto the blade maybe, and they're just spinning continuously.
Yeah.
That's when you get the sound, and
Yeah.
that will definitely tear up a pair of bearings.
Right.
Yeah. So I would just replace them this time and then set them up with a little more space.
Just
and
back it off a
Yeah,
little bit.
back it off a hair. Maybe put a piece of paper between the two. Sometimes I do that.
Yeah.
But
Guys, we sound a little lethargic.
We do.
well,
We
it's
gotta pep it up a
snowing
little bit.
outside. You know, it's a little.
I had a big old plate of General Chow's chicken for lunch.
I'm sure
feeling-
people are very happy to hear about that.
Starting to feel a little drowsy.
Well, let's try to kick it up a bit. Let's move on to a question from Bruce Hamilton. And Bruce says, I would be interested in your thoughts regarding the safest direction to cut using a sliding compound miter saw. Internet consensus seems to be to push rather than pull, but that violates both my experience and my analysis. Why is the standard recommendation for radial arm saws to pull, but for sliding compound miter saws to push? I think the rule is you just push with the miter saw. It's the way it was designed to operate.
Yeah, and the miter saw, you can lift the blade up toward you, down, and then through the cut back towards the saw, whereas a radial arm saw, you really can't lift the blade up and over the saw. So you somehow have to pull the blade out, thread the board through there, and push it. But no, it's.
I think a lot of people try to take too heavy of a cut if they're really cutting, kind of thicker stock, rough cutting it, and they come down too much. Sometimes that
You do
slider
get a
will kind of kick back at you.
jump back at you, yeah.
and
But also the way the blade spins on both of the machines, right? The teeth are spinning over the top and back in towards the,
Yes.
they're spinning, in a sense, it's spinning towards you.
Right.
So in that case, a climb cut would be to pull the blade towards you.
Which is with the radial arm
Which is
saw.
what you do with the radial arm,
Right.
and which is why you do not do that. You cannot do that with a chop saw. You don't want to do that with a sliding chop saw because it's a climb cut, and it can jump back at you.
Yeah, and usually the teeth on a regular chop saw blade are angled such that you don't want to do that. Whereas a radial arm saw blade, you have negative rake
Yes.
in terms of the teeth are actually angled. The
Backwards.
tips
They
are
lean
further back from the
backwards.
bottom,
Yeah.
which makes that climb cut a little bit safer. But if you don't have that type of blade, for instance, on a chop saw, and you try to do that, that's a little bit scary.
Yeah,
A little dicey.
And I have a radial arm saw, and in theory, you could pull the blade out and then push it in, but if you could get the blade clear, whatever board you had in there. But also a radial arm saw, it's easier to control that climb cut because you have this rigid arm that the blade is in, or in a sense rides on, which is a different setup than a slightly different setup than a sliding compound miter saw, where the seems to me, this is my take on it. I don't know if this is factually true, but it seems that the head is a little more free moving, so to speak.
Sure.
You know, so it's harder to control that climb cut.
Right.
And so you don't want to do it.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's move on. Let's get on to something a little more lively even. Today,
More lively than radial arm saws?
Today, we have a special guest on the phone. Clark Kellogg, a professional woodworker in Houston, Texas, is with us today. And Clark has been woodworking since 1994 when he and his father worked on projects in the family garage. He has a degree in Bachelor of Arts in Studio Arts from the University of Virginia, and he also graduated from the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship's 9-month comprehensive program. He also graduated from the Fine Woodworking program at the College of the Redwoods. Clark has appeared on Fine Woodworking and other publications and has had his work shown on all 3 coasts. Let's welcome Clark on the line.
Thanks for having me.
Today, I'm Tom. We haven't met officially yet. Mike Pekovich is with me, and Matt Kenny is sitting to my right.
How's it going, Clark?
How's it going?
Hey, Clark, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Now, I know you and I haven't worked together. I know you worked with Matt a few times, and we were just looking at your bio, and I told the listeners a little bit about you. And one of the interesting things that I saw in your bio is that you graduated from both the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship and from the College of the Redwoods. And I was curious about comparing and contrasting what you learned from each program and how you integrated that education into your current work.
So I went to Center for Furniture Craftsmanship first, which is sort of a mouthful. And the focus there is more, I don't want to say production based, but it's more, I guess, kind of design based. So you end up, you draw plans, and at least while I was there was always any piece you made was made kind of with the intention of you would potentially make another one of those pieces down the road. So you would build, there's a lot of time spent building jigs and fixtures and patterns. And like I said, you draw fairly detailed plans. And it was always with an eye towards bringing it to market, I guess, if that makes sense. There's sort of dogs around. Whereas College of the Redwoods, it's more kind of, there's a lot more focus on hand tools, and each piece, you spend a lot longer on each piece. You only build two pieces over the course of a year, as opposed to maybe 4 or 5 or 6 at CFC. Wow. And you end up changing things as you go to respond to the wood. So there's a lot more emphasis on details and kind of responding to the exact board you might have on hand, and less emphasis on entirely new forms of furniture, if that makes sense.
So you basically you've combined both theories into your work. So you've learned how to build to make money, and you also learned how to enjoy it at the same time.
But it's worked out. I guess it's ended up being at least I've found a way to kind of balance the two, and having a background in being able to take pieces much further along with machines and set things up kind of for production, and then finish things with hand tools and be able to put the level of detail that I want into a piece by hand. I think has really helped, and is a way I really enjoy working.
And it's funny. I think that's. I'm sorry, man. I think that's kind of the way we try to preach to people, is that you can combine the machine and handwork, and the hand tools come in to take the place of machines sometimes to do those details.
Well, to me, Clark, it's Matt. What it sounded like to me when Clark was saying that is that, I've met a lot of woodworkers all over the country, and sometimes you meet a woodworker who is sort of an artist. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you meet one who is, I think Phil Lowe always says that, he's just a craftsman, that he's just a guy, he's executing the skills that he's learned. And it kind of sounds like that, it's at CFC, you get that side of it where you're learning to make furniture, make it efficiently, and the emphasis is on learning that side of it. Whereas at College of the Redwoods, it sort of sounds like, and I may be misinterpreting all Clark entirely on this, but I just read it into it what I want.
Just chime in, Clark, if he does.
But it sounds like at Redwoods, there's a very strong emphasis on developing yourself as aesthetically. And like you said, paying attention to details, being very careful. And, that's not surprising if you've read Krenoff's books. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways, he got the best of both worlds. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good way to put it. And at CRs, it's very much about the process by which you make a piece. And almost to the point that, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but the finished piece is almost kind of secondary to the process by which you make it, and the machines you use and the tools you have on your bench are all crucial to the way that you make a piece, and that's which is why pieces tend to have kind of a look. Which is a look I really like, and I'm not disparaging that by any means. But the other side of that at CSC would be, you kind of start with, what is the thing that I want to make? And then it's like you reverse engineer it, and you say, okay, well, that's the thing that I want to make. How can I go about making it? And you figure out a process to make the thing, rather than saying, here's the process. What am I going to end up with at the end of this?
Oh, that's an interesting way to explain it. Yeah, didn't Krenoff say that what you make is for the client, how you make it is for yourself? Was that Krenoff, or was that somebody else?
I don't. It didn't. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Something he could have said.
Thanks, man.
I don't recognize it, but
it sounds like something.
It sounds like
it seems reasonable. Sure,
Matt. I think you just made that up.
Really?
Yes.
No, I didn't. Someone else said that. I think that approach, that notion, is something a lot of our readers and a lot of amateur woodworkers would identify with. That they get involved in woodworking not because of the products they're producing, but because of the process and their enjoyment of it, and that's what they like about woodworking.
Right. The fun thing is being in a shop, and if anything actually makes it out of the shop, then that's like a bonus.
Now, do you still have fun being a pro? Does being a pro take any of the enjoyment out of the craft for you?
Well, yes and no. I have a hard time imagining having like a grown-up job.
So would we.
But there's always sort of the grass is greener kind of a thing, and there are definitely days when you're like, oh my God, like what I not pay my phone bill? And why? Where did everyone go? There's still pressure of like, hoping that someone is interested in the thing that you're making.
Right.
So how can be nerve-wracking.
What do you think? I know you do sell a lot of pieces, and I know you have a big Instagram following of more than 15,000. How do you integrate your social media presence into your professional and amateur life? Is the Instagram or the social media more of a personal thing, or do you use it to drive your business?
I don't know, honestly. I'll say that the main reason I got into Instagram was because I'm kind of lazy. I'm really late, and I got tired of. I try to avoid using the word blogging as a verb because it sort of bums me out. But getting home and having a whole thing to write and upload pictures and deal with all that just ended up seeming like homework. Mm-hmm. Which I'd kind of sworn off of, and Instagram just worked out to be really easy. I can take a picture and say, here's what I'm doing, this is the thing, and not make a big deal out of it, and be back to what I'm actually working on, 90 seconds later. Yeah. In terms of it actually driving business or anything like that, I don't know. I think it's mostly other woodworkers that are excited about. At least that has been my impression anyway. Yeah. Which again is not bad, but I don't know. I'm still waiting for the phone call from someone.
Hey, I found you on Instagram.
I just saw that thing on Instagram. I would like you to make me 5 of them.
Well, it's funny that
has not happened just yet.
The way all three of us have been using it, and Ben Strano, our web producer, is it's basically just kind of jumping into the community and giving people a glimpse into what we're doing, and for us to check out what everyone else is doing. It is like you said, to me, it is a lot better or easier than a blog, and it feels like blogs are sort of going the way of the dinosaur with all these other methods.
Yeah.
There's an immediacy to Instagram, and to some extent Twitter. I don't really like Twitter. I prefer Instagram. An immediacy to it, and also a sense of community. And what's really nice about Instagram is that there's a visual aspect to it. So, and also more so than on Twitter, Instagram is very international. Mm-hmm. I have, I follow people from all over the world, and people from all over the world follow me. And so I get to see what guys in Japan are building, what guys in Australia are building, and, Europe, all over Europe. And there is a really nice sense of community on Instagram, and the immediacy, which, like as Clark said, it's really fast. A picture says so much that you don't have to sit there and write. You can just dash off, unless you're Mike and you're crafting, greeting card paragraphs to go along with your pictures.
These beautiful snowflakes of posts.
And connecting it to the contemplative soul or something.
I go through 5 drafts of every Instagram post. Yeah. And I have a sort of a sample audience that I post to, and I get their reactions before I actually post.
Like a focus group.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not
different markets.
Yeah.
That's not true. Mike doesn't go through 5 drafts. It's actually 10.
But Clark,
it's already been like weeks that he's been polishing and
right. Our copy editor checks them all for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Clark, I really like your feed a lot, and it's sort of like what you were talking about in that woodworking can be a pretty solitary pursuit, and you can go on a blog and see a finished piece of furniture, but you really don't get insights into what the maker is up to, how they're making. And I like Instagram from the standpoint that I get to be in your shop. We get to see what you're working on. It's definitely, as Matt said, it's a community, but it's also a peek into what other woodworkers are up to. I think that's a really neat thing. And you're right. I don't think any of us are in the position to buy any furniture from you, but I definitely enjoy that you're taking the time to make those posts, because that's kind of a cool thing.
Well, I'll say, just I mean, I know that there are people on Instagram who will, like, there's a turner in upstate New York. She'll post a turning and say, you know, $80 to the first person that comments, or the first person that wants it in the comments. And I actually did get a commission through Instagram. But from another woodworker.
I tried that with a piece of furniture. I said $4,000 for the first person to comment, and
nobody commented. It was crickets on Instagram.
You thought maybe your account had broken or something.
Yes.
Why is nobody chiming in on this? Weird.
So Clark, I know you build a lot of different types of pieces, you know, from seating to shelving. Do you have kind of a general description for what your aesthetic might be? Do you have a kind of a quick summary of what you're all about in terms of your design?
No, not really. This is going to sound really pretentious and annoying, but I really try to make each piece kind of its own piece, and a big part of the process for me is figuring out kind of the mood or the feeling of the thing that I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. You know, like what does this thing want to be, and how does it want to present itself, and like in a room.
Yeah.
And I sort of let that dictate what it is going to be. If it's going to be super sharp and crisp with chamfers and polished bevels and everything like that, or is it going to be kind of like softer and I don't know, dreamier or quieter? I don't know if that's the word, but I try to let each piece be its own thing and not worry too much about the thing that came before it.
Right.
Dictating what I'm going to make next. I want, I always want to push myself forward, and I want to learn from each piece and be able to apply what I learned to the next thing. But I also don't want to look back and say like, well, I'd really like to do this one thing, but it's not going to really match this other thing I made, so I better just leave that be. Like that just seems like kind of a silly or arbitrary way to work. Like, why not just move forward and make the thing that you want to make? I know, I don't know if you know the carver Chris Pye.
Yep.
He has been a big influence on me. He's a carver, and that's all he does is carving, but he carves in such a wide variety of styles. He does sculpture work and kind of very like floral reproduction architectural stuff. He does lettering, and he said he just like his goal, and I'm probably misquoting him, or maybe we could just attribute it to Krenov. His goal is to do it the best that he can, or make every piece as best as he can, whatever that piece is, which I think is a really good approach.
It's good advice. Well, speaking of, I don't mean to derail your thought, but it's funny. Speaking of Chris, I read that, or I saw that you're doing a lot of letter carving, and you learned that from him too, right?
Yes, I did. I was really excited and fortunate that I got to spend some time with him. And I took a class at CFC actually to learn lettering from him. And actually, I was just working on some letters when you called, so I'm sure they'll be out on Instagrams shortly after this.
So how are you incorporating that into your work? Is it just you're creating like a signature, or are you doing just commissions for folks who want signs?
Yeah, more commissions, more lettering projects. It with a few exceptions, have not really managed to incorporate lettering and furniture making. at least to the extent that I would like it. It sort of just hasn't come up yet. I really love doing both, but so far they seem to exist kind of in separate departments.
Well, one last question before we let you get back to your letter carving. What's the piece you're working on right now aside from the letter carving? What are you building?
Let's see. Well, I just finished a bench, and then I've got these letters that are going to be a pair of mirrors now, and then after that, got a table that's going to go over a gigantic radiator, which is a weird kind of a problem, but it's a thing I love building pieces for like super specific problems, and to the point that I almost kind of have an issue, or not an issue, but I have trouble just thinking of a piece that could exist anywhere. I find I really enjoy the process of figuring out a set of solutions to a very specific set of problems. So like we have this super weird space and we needed to do this and also do this. Like, okay, great.
That's interesting. You should say that. Another furniture maker I know named Hank Gilpin, who's a very good designer, said to me once, he said, I can't design unless I have constraints. That all design begins with constraints. And, like you're saying here that, the specific table that has to go over a radiator. He said, I need the customer, the client to tell me that they want a table that does X, Y, and Z and is going to fit in over here. And when he gets those constraints, then he can really start designing. Otherwise, just to pull something out of thin air with no constraints on what you're going to make is really difficult.
Yeah, it's enormously difficult, and for me, it feels like just sort of floating in space. Like, okay, I'm just going to make anything. It's like, well, what? Okay, so what? And why should it exist? Like, what is the reason for this thing being in the world? And it can be tough to get past that. And I know, sort of bringing it back to College of the Redwoods, that was a thing that I really enjoyed about that program, was that you didn't have a constraint on exactly what you could make, but the constraint was, here is how you're going to build it. Mm-hmm. The constraint was the process itself.
Right. I've found that whenever I'm searching for a reason why something needs to be in the world, if I can't find a really, the ultimate, I always just come back to that's where I'm going to put my pot.
Yeah. Put your weed in there. Yeah.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
That seems like an odd thing to end the interview on, but hey, Clark, we all appreciate you spending a few minutes with us and kind of giving us some insights into how you work and what you're all about. I appreciate taking the time, and I appreciate you writing for us. And I know Matt is working on an article with you as we speak. So I'm looking forward to seeing you back in the magazine. Again, thanks.
Yeah, no, me too. Well, thanks for calling, I guess.
All right, Clark.
Talk to you soon, Clark.
Take care.
All right.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was very insightful. I really enjoy Clark's work, all manner. He does, and I like his design aesthetic, and I love the discussion about, designing for a specific need. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, the piece he's going to do for us upcoming is really nice. A really nice wall cabinet. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It was really encouraging because his approach to furniture making and really finding meaning in his work, I think that's something that a lot of us can share, especially if we're sort of passionate amateurs or maybe, wannabe pros. But I always thought that if you dive into it as a pro full time, that aspect of making, that thoughtfulness has to go by the wayside, and you're just like cranking out kitchen cabinets or something just to keep the lights on. But it's neat to see how he still has that approach to his work.
It occurred to me while I was speaking, I wonder if the difference between being sort of an amateur woodworker and a professional is like the difference between dating and being married.
I don't know.
I'm not going to jump into that discussion.
That's some I could take that further, but I probably should.
Thank you.
That's for our comments section on the Shop Talk Live page.
You got to give them something to write in about each issue, each episode. Rather.
I think you already did. Let's get back to the questions. This one comes from Theo Daling. He's having some jointer troubles. He writes, "I recently got hold of an old jointer from the 1940s. The problem is I get a cut for about 12 inches and then no more cutting. Longer boards seem to work better. Help me, please." I did my best to check that the outfeed table is aligned with the top of the blade. What is wrong, and what am I doing wrong? Do you want to kick us off, Matt?
I think he also said that he checked that the tables were coplanar as well.
Yes.
So he basically said that the tables are aligned with each other and the outfeed table is aligned with the top of the blade. If you're cutting for a part of the time, then it stops cutting. One of those two things is not true. Is not true. So
he also it was a pretty long question, but he also asked about the correct straight edge to use for checking, and maybe he's not using the right equipment to double check.
I don't pull out anything fancy, but if you, especially on an old joiner, I think the first culprit is probably a sagging outfeed table or even a sagging infeed table.
Yeah.
If the table is basically sagging down on the outfeed side, as you make a cut, and then you start to register that outfeed side of the board on that sagging table, it's going to lift up the part that hasn't been cut yet, and you won't be making cuts. And then conversely, if the blades are slightly lower than the outfeed table, as you're making a cut and you start to register the board on that outfeed table, which is higher than the cutter head, then you're going to stop cutting too.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, he in some models you can shim up that outfeed table.
I think just about all of them, I think you can get something in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. Either his table sags.
Yes.
Or the knives are too low. It's got to be one of those two things, right?
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there could be a situation where the outfeed table has actual like a cup to it, but that's such a weird thing. I wouldn't even go there.
Yeah. Right.
I would, get as long of a straight edge as you can. I think a 2-foot straight edge is fine. A metal straight edge and
I think you need to use an actual straight edge and not a level from the big box store or something.
Don't use one of those wooden yardsticks.
Yeah, don't use that. Don't use a 2x4. You need to get an actual straight edge. Like, Veritas sells some affordable ones. All those guys in South Africa, it might be hard for them to get those, but get some type of straight edge, a good straight edge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just raise the outfeed table above the cutter head a little bit so it clears the cutter head. Raise the infeed table until it's, roughly level, and, put that straight edge across one and just make sure it doesn't rock. Mm-hmm. Make sure there's no light coming out of the bottom.
Keep working the problem.
Yeah, and then from there you want to set the outfeed table. I like to set the outfeed table just incrementally lower than my cutters. And the way I was taught to do this, and I still do it, I use a metal ruler on edge, and I put that on the outfeed table, and I'll rotate the cutter by hand. You don't want to turn the machine on. And I'm looking for the blade to lift up the straight edge and move it toward the, infeed side of the joiner 1/4 of an inch. And then that's right. So it's slightly higher, but I get really good results like that. Very minimal snipe at the end, but at least I'm making sure I'm taking a complete cut all the way across
What's
the board.
The thickness of your straight edge? Are you talking like a regular rule or?
Just a metal ruler. Like pull out your 12-inch ruler out of your combo square or something like that. Or
I do something similar, but what I do is take test cuts and raise the outfeed table until the amount of snipe at the end of the edge is minimal, and then that's it.
Well, I'm going to start using Mike's technique. I'm just taking test cuts, and then until it's totally the snipe is gone.
Yeah, and what I do, and also I have just the 3-knife cutter head, and I have to set the blades manually. And so I'll use that same 1/4 inch trick with the straight edge to make sure that each end of the blade is protruding the same, and that all three blades are protruding the same. If everyone lifts up the ruler, moves it a quarter of an inch, then I know I'm pretty good. And I never actually get all the way there. I do it until I'm tired of resetting my joiner knives, and then I plug it in and use it.
I thought you had the joiner knife set up like I do. What are they, disposal blades?
Yes, and then I switched to these little inserts that register to the cutter head, and they accept disposable blades, and that's definitely a lot better.
That's what you have now.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I have now.
What you used to do was the thing.
Yes.
Yeah, because I got tired of doing that too, the quarter-inch move and all that stuff.
Yeah. Now, the only problem with the disposable knives is they're really designed for a slightly longer cutter head. So my clearance on the ends of my blades and some internals in my joiner is so small that if they're not exactly centered, you'll turn it and it'll just like get stuck somewhere. So I have a new and different headache setting my joiner knives. So,
all right, let's move on to another question. This one comes from Dave Smiley, and Dave has a question about push sticks. He says, "Can I have your take on what is the best or your preferred style of push stick for table saws?" And he also mentioned that he noticed that we all have 10 fingers. So I guess he assumes we're doing something right.
We do, but I used to have 11.
There are different types and styles out there. I prefer a push stick, which is basically it's a rectangle of 3/4 inch plywood, maybe 6 inches high by, I don't know, maybe like 14 inches long. And there's a little, foot cut from the bottom, so I'll trim a 1/4 inch off the bottom, leaving maybe a 2-inch long little foot at the back edge, a little hook. I like that a lot because I can put pressure down on the stock over a wide length of stock, and I can use that I can apply rotational force as I'm pushing a piece through the blade to keep the stock against a fence. I find that a single point push stick, like the little long guys, the little long handles with the little beak,
those are sharp.
You can't control the direction of the board, because what's happening is as the blade is making the cut, it's spinning against the board. That drag it creates actually wants to pull the board away from the fence. And that's when you really get into trouble. You get bad cuts. That's also where you really risk getting kickback. So I like a push stick where I can hold it to the tabletop, and I can also control the rotational movement to keep it against the fence as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I make a similar push stick, and mine is probably like 12 inches long, but I like a kind of a roundy shape, and my hand sits high above the blade. But I also, as needed, I have a couple thin push sticks that I use for thinner stuff. I make the wooden ones and I'm not too worried about it, but sometimes it's nice to have a thin push stick to, it's the same design, extra long, but narrow or thin to get past the blade.
Oh, you guys want me to talk?
Come on.
Are you sure?
No, you haven't had your full hour yet.
Yes. Well, I use long ones, like 14, 16 inches long, and they're sort of teardrop shaped. So like half a teardrop. So it's low in the front and it comes back higher and rounds over towards the back. And it has a little foot on it like Mike described. And I have them, 1 3/4 inch MDF, 1 1/2 inch MDF. And I make them for narrower rips and so forth. And I'll make ones that also that I don't mind cutting through, so that I can have a thicker one so that it's on both sides of the blade when I'm making really narrow rips.
Right. I like that.
But they're all generally that shape. The other thing that I will sometimes do, and it's a really thin piece of stock, I'll just take a piece of the stock that I'm going to rip and cross-cut off a small piece and glue that to the bottom of a piece of MDF, for example.
Oh, okay.
And let that be the hook. And that way, because I found that, you always want that. I like the little foot at the back needs to be not as tall as your stock is thick.
Right. You don't want that keeping from putting pressure all the way down.
Yeah, you want the entire length of the push stick to be flat on the surface of the board so you can push down.
Right.
That's really an issue when you get to thin stuff because if you have thin stock and it's not pushing down at the back, as you go through the blade, it'll start to pick it up and go, and slap it down on the in between the push stick and the table, which is why I say I cut off a thin piece of the stock that I'm going to cut, or a short piece, and use it as the foot, so that I make sure I get positive traction or whatever.
Sounds like method of work.
Yeah, another style of push stick I really like.
I submitted it to another magazine. Sorry.
We'll talk later.
Is a joiner pad style push stick with a flat pad in the handle.
Those are great for non-through cuts.
Or wide stock, like if I'm cutting drawer bottoms and I really want to, and I have a lot of space between the rip vents and the blade, I like that the more the push paddle style, because I can really hold that stock down against the tabletops and really keep that against the fence. I've tried some with like just sandpaper on the bottom. I make my own, square plywood, a little plywood handle, put some sandpaper on it. But if there's any dust or anything between the push pad and the stock, it slips really easily, amazingly easily, even with coarse sandpaper on there. So I'll also put like a really shallow hook at the back.
Yeah.
And that works out really well.
I like those for when I'm running grooves and dados. That allows me to
keep pressure down. And
also, I mean, I'm sure we're going to get letters about this, but also just run straight over the blade.
Oh, yeah.
And not pick a hand up and move over.
Yeah, if you're rabbiting the edge, it's really important for a consistent depth to keep that against the tabletop all the way through. So a pair of push pads is really great for that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. Let's move on to a segment. This will be fun. It's time for our all-time favorite technique of the week. For this week.
Didn't sound very convincing. Like, this will be fun.
Come on. I'm trying to wake myself up.
This is going to be fun. I think you will really enjoy this segment.
Well, how about you, Mike? You want to head up first?
Sure. This is, what are we doing?
We're doing all-time favorite technique of all time.
Okay, so this is an all-time favorite technique of all time, plus just with a little pinch of smooth move in there, too.
A little dash.
I am getting ready to head down to Raleigh, North Carolina to make a piece of furniture with my buddy Sean. We're going to be making a dresser that actually ran in the magazine, and I've also taught as a class in the past. Whenever I teach big projects in classes to make layout a little bit easier, I make story sticks with the little joinery marks on the story sticks, so you can put that up against the furniture part, make your tick marks, and not everybody is like doing their own rendition of 28 1/4 inches from the bottom of the leg, kind of a thing. So this dresser, a lot of parts, lots of really involved joinery. So I was making story sticks for each individual part. And then I thought, well, actually this story stick, if I can make some marks on one side, then I can make some notches on the other. I can use this kind of for two different parts. And then I said, well, then I can flip it over and actually use the opposite side for other parts. And so what I ended up with, I started out with these individual story sticks really clean, but I ended up with one monster mother of all story sticks. And I'll post a picture of it. And it has about, 47 little notches of various widths, which indicate the dimensions of different mortises along, I think, like 5 different pieces of this thing. So... And I was reminded of this because as I was getting out of the story sticks from last year in prepping to work with Sean, I pulled out these story sticks and said, I've got all these. Perfect. We'll be able to knock this out. And I saw this thing, and it's just like, oh, my gosh, what is this for?
It's a growth chart.
Things for? So it's good, and I finally got my head back around it. I'm glad I have it. But there's probably, one story stick too far.
A story stick too far.
Yes.
Well, I'll take mine. Will be short. I think Matt has a lot to say. One of the things I use my bench dogs for. Sometimes I have a bench hook, and sometimes I can't find it. But when I'm planing joinery like a tenon with my shoulder plane, I use my bench dogs to hold the workpiece, steady on the bench. But one of the things that happens with these, I have these 3/4 inch round brass bench dogs, and they tend to get stuck in my workbench, and I always have to reach underneath and pound them up, and it's always hard to get them in and out. And so I thought, I saw this piece of paraffin wax that I use on the bottom of my plane sitting on my bench, and I thought, hey, I wonder if that'll work. And so I hit the sides of the bench dog with the wax and put it in the hole, and it was like a transformation, an amazing thing. I heard music and everything, and I was able to put the dog in and out without having to get on my knees to push it back up from underneath. It was kind of an enlightening moment for me. I discovered something.
Awesome.
Yeah. I have a way that we can summarize that, but I'm not going to say it on the podcast.
We'll talk later.
So my all-time favorite technique of the week for all time next week has to do with bandsaw boxes, which I think in the past I've not been shy about saying I dislike. But when I started to do the 52 boxes thing, I decided, okay, well, I'm going to try some bandsaw boxes and see what I can do. And then I saw Michael Cullen's bandsaw boxes in issue 250 of Fine Woodworking magazine, and they were fantastic.
Yeah, awesome.
Just unbelievable. And one of the things that Michael does, which is so smart, I mean, one of the problems with bandsaw boxes is that you have this solid block of wood and you're cutting it up and creating kerfs in it, and then you're trying to put this block of wood back together to make something that fits nicely. And
right.
Well, to be honest, I see a lot of them and they cut and they make drawers and stuff, and all the drawers are they fit so sloppy, and it's not very good. But you even have that problem when you're just making a simple box and you want to glue it all back up to glue the bottom in. And this box was just made by making 2 cuts along the sides and then cutting off the ends and then gluing it all back together. But even when you do that with the bottom in there, you still end up with some gaps just because of the nature of taking the kerf out. And then it's just so I did I did 2 with that technique, and I didn't really like it. And so then, I read Michael's article before it was published, because I sit next to John Benson, who edited it. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to try this. So I finally tried it. What Michael does, which is so smart, is that when he cuts out the interior, he angles the table on the bandsaw like 2 to 3 degrees, so that you get the center that you cut out is actually this like a tapered or wedged plug, right? And it's narrower smaller at the bottom than it is at the top. So when you glue it the sides back together, this plug will fit down in there and extend out the bottom, and then you can cut it off and you get this nice tight fitting plug.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I made a box using that technique, and it worked fine, but yeah.
All right, so I think I'm the only person in the world that this technique did not work for.
Well, no. What I was going to say, I did, like Matt, I did have some gaps, like I did a curved version, like a teardrop version almost, and I had some slight gaps at the bottom that I wasn't happy about.
Well, so when I put the plug back in, I was not happy with how it fit, and I'm sure that it was just a matter of execution. It's my fault and not the technique's fault. But I was like, I don't want to do this, and I thought, I said, well, what else could I do? And then I thought about a box I made just before this one, which had a bottom on it that had a little gap between the box and the bottom, and I thought, I don't have to use that plug to make the bottom. I can just glue something on there, and I'll get on the inside, you get really nice, tight, clean joint. And then I can also do give this box more of a me feel,
Michael Cullen is just like suddenly got a sharp pain in his neck for some reason.
So I don't know what my technique. Well, my technique is I finally figured out when I'm making a bandsaw box, I really don't have to do what
do the pluggy.
Do the plug. I don't have to. It's like when I initially started making the bandsaw boxes, I was like, I'm definitely not going to make a bandsaw box like all the ones you see in bandsaw box boxes, where they're all really super organic, crazy shapes, and it's a drawer inside a drawer inside a drawer inside a tooth fairy or something, and it's just crazy stuff. And but figuring that out, that I don't have to use the plug, now allows me to make bandsaw boxes that fit better within my sort of personal design taste.
Yeah, and this is by no means a knock, but you somehow found a way to make kind of an uptight bandsaw box. And that it really, I mean, it does have sort of, a resemblance to Michael Cullen's boxes, but it's definitely the Matt Kenny, very precise personality to it. So, once again, you just, bring your own.
And the grain on one side is kind of in a frown, which is really funny.
Well, that's because it was riffs on stock. And so when you cut a curve into it, on one side it's a smile, on the other side it's a frown. And if I take I'm going to experiment this weekend, a flat sawn piece, and if you orient the grain one way, it'll produce a smile on both sides.
Okay,
and if you orient it the other way, it's going to produce a frown on both sides. So I'm going to work. I'm going to work on that weekend because it actually was bothering me.
So when Clark Kellogg was talking about furniture with moods, your boxes are either smiling or they're frowning.
Yeah, and he can turn it upside down and turn it, in whatever orientation matches his mood of the day, and just put it on his desk.
Yes.
Well, okay.
You'll know whether to talk to Matt today or not.
But where that's more important is, you guys are making light of this, but it actually is important that. So this is a curved side, right?
Yes.
And so if it's smiling, it looks like it follows the curve. It complements the curve, right?
It does very much.
Yeah,
yes.
but if it's frowning, it doesn't so much.
It's sad.
It's
sad.
So that's why it's, but I think that if I just do some experimentation, I'll figure out exactly how to orient the grain in terms of riff sawn, quarter sawn, flat sawn to get it to smile on both sides.
It's supposed to be fun.
It is fun. It's really quick. My son is watched me make this one. Not watched me make it, but he sort of saw it in the house as it was being made, and he's confounded right now as to how this one and the next one I made were made. So this weekend, I think actually I'm going to take him down in the shop and we're going to make a couple together.
Awesome.
Yeah, that is the fun part about making the bandsawn box. It is kind of confounding for folks. It's almost like a dovetail joint. They can't get their heads around it, how it all comes together.
Unfortunately, he has 11 fingers too, so even if we cut one off, it's not a big deal.
You've got some extra. All right, let's wrap up this puppy. Tune in again in 2 weeks on February 26th for our next episode. If you have any woodworking questions, send them as well as your comments to shoptalk@taunton.com. You can spread the word about Shop Talk Live by hooking us up with your woodworking friends by any means necessary, including Twitter and Facebook. And you can catch the podcast via iTunes. And while you're there, please give us the all-powerful 5-star rating. You can also stream the podcast on the web at www.shoptalklive.com or catch us on iHeartRadio. Thank you for listening and have fun in the shop.
Didn't Krenoff say that what you make is for the client, how you make it is for yourself? Was that Krenoff? Or was that somebody else?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Something he could have said.
Thanks, man.
I don't recognize it, but it
It sounds like something.
It sounds like
it seems reasonable.